In the early 1970s, a revolution was brewing in the computer industry. A new processor chip, the 6502, was invented. This chip was placed in a lot of computers and video game consoles in the 70s and the 80s. The 6502 improved technology by allowing them to become cheaper, powerful, and more compact, which impacted the sociality. The MOS 6502 was cheaper by around $280 than most competitors. Chips like the Intel 8080 and Motorola's 6800 cost around $300, making them unviable for home systems, but the 6502 was around $25. The reason why it became cheaper is because most people couldn't afford a chip that expensive back then. Making it affordable leads to higher profit margins for the business using it. Usually, the business would deploy lots of these, so the price difference helps companies a lot. To add on, with the amount of tech using the 6502 is in, it allows reduced prices generating lots of sales, also increasing profit margins. This is how and why the 6502 was cheaper, which impacted its sociality.
The 6502 improved computers in many ways for our society. Even with its simpler instruction set, one of the improvements was how it made computers and other technology powerful, or even created new ones. The MOS 6502 was used on the first and second Apple computers, the Apple I and the Apple II, packing so much power into a tiny $25 package took a lot of work. Its speed was usually around 100 to 300 megahertz, which today is extremely slow. But back then, it was fast. And it had a 16-bit address lines allowing to address numbers as high as 65,536. This is how the MOS 6502 improved computers in many ways, by making them more powerful for our human society.
The 6502 was really small, but there were other CPUs that were compact at the time. But the 6502 had a simple instruction set that made it extremely cheap for the time, which also allowed it a revolution because you could fit it in, for example, an NES, an Atari system. Spin-offs of the CPU can also be found in the Commodore 64, a VIC-20, etc. It also did not use much power due to it being compact. The instruction set did not use useless instructions like WAI, which push registers onto the stack, decrement the stack pointer, ends the wait for an interrupt. If the interrupt mask status is 1 when WAI is executed, a non-maskable interrupt is required to exit the wait state. Otherwise, set the interrupt mask status to 1 when the interrupt occurs, which is very confusing, but basically, it takes the values in the registers, places where the CPU holds data, and puts them onto the stack, like a stack of numbers used to return from loops, and sets the interrupt mask status to 1 unless it's already 1.
In conclusion, the 6502 was a turning point in history because it was cheap, compact, and fast, allowing it to fit into lots of machines in the 70s and the 80s. Also, it being way cheaper than the Intel 8080 and the Motorola's 6800, while also being more powerful, along with leaving a huge legacy where hobby enthusiasts and people of the 70s and even the 80s, tracing the future of computing, leading all the way back to today. going from simple microprocessors that could only be programmed in assembly into having CPUs run programs inside of programs, and more.